Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, January 31st, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jonathan M. Katz, proprietor of the Racket newsletter, author of Gangsters of Capitalism, Smedley Butler, The Marines, and the Making and Breaking of America's Empire. Also on the program today, UN Security Council meets to debate the Russia-Ukraine situation. Meanwhile, the Biden administration and Congress looking at sanctions which could be aimed at the average Russian citizen. Meanwhile, Donald Trump on the campaign trail, sort of, once again says he'd pardon January 6 defendants, of course, giving a green light to a January 6 sequel. Lobbying continues for Biden's Supreme Court pick. Consumer spending falls in December as Omicron takes its toll. New York State Democrats released their congressional districts maps, and it would mean a pickup of at least 3 congressional seats. Meanwhile, 36,000 Afghan refugees still lack a legal pathway to permanent status in this country. And back in Afghanistan, their economy devastated. The Iran deal talks enter its final stage. Diplomats return to their homes in Europe and the States. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is another week. It is another Monday. Emma Vigeland is here.
Hello.
Just like
I'm just so happy.
Vibrating from the playoffs this weekend.
Even Matt watched, and he's more of a basketball head. So yeah,
it's true. I watched the Bengals defeat the Kansas City Chiefs.
That was pretty amazing.
Usually have sympathy with the Missouri River teams, but Cincinnati, I like that.
Well, it's just a cool story. I mean, I was saying before the show, like, these two teams couldn't be built in two different ways. The LA Rams, all glitz and glamour, mortgaged their entire future for these stars, including Odell, who I'll always love. And then the Bengals were the worst team in the league 2 years ago. And they drafted Burrow. They didn't trade down, and look what it gets them. It's just it's the most exciting playoffs in years. So.
Also, Tom Brady's not in it.
Yeah, which is fun.
And announced that he was retiring. Well, sort of announced, but it sounds like it's just he wants the timing on it because there's got to be some tie-in with a product.
I would imagine. Right? I would imagine when he launches his NFT is when he's going to be retiring. He is one of those crypto. Seems like every person I like in the NFL, I find out 2 seconds later that they're shilling crypto.
It's all of the
well.
NBA too. It sucks.
I mean, look, if tulips are nice. If people want to, I wouldn't recommend it to people, but people need a hobby.
I know. I mean, I would collect Beanie Babies. That might be more worth your time, but to each their own if you have a ton of money.
Meanwhile, I guess the sort of the quietest story that will be ongoing over the next, hopefully just a couple of weeks. It should be even less than that as far as I'm concerned. Will be the Biden administration's nominee for the Supreme Court. It depends on who he nominates, I guess, on some level, but there's every reason to believe that this should be fairly smooth sailing fairly smooth sailing. However, it's got to happen quick, because if you take a look at the average age of a Democratic senator, there is reason for concern. And so they need to get this person confirmed as soon as possible. Once they are confirmed, doesn't matter how long Breyer stays on the court, they are confirmed. So he can retire in June and go off and give a bunch more speeches about how wonderful our democracy is, whatever he wants to do. Get the person confirmed. And the Republicans, of course, are trying to figure out how they can say that this process is wrong, or
too close to the election.
Too close to the election, too close to the last election, too close to the future election, too close to primaries, Democratic primaries and congressional races. I mean, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But of course, how can they also generate the angst that they need from their base when they know, the base does, that they have a 6-3 majority? And the reality is that the implications of this seat, unless something dramatic happens, are not going to be too great, at least for a decade or two.
It's an investment in the future.
Yes. But that's hard to get people upset about, unless, of course, you have a go-to as the Republicans. And we're going to see this even from Susan Collins, who's ostensibly one of the more reasonable Republicans. Here she is on ABC's George Stephanopoulos.
George, I would welcome the appointment of a black female to the court. I believe that diversity benefits the Supreme Court, but the way that the president has handled this nomination has been clumsy at best. It adds to the further perception that the court is a political institution like Congress, when it is not supposed to be. So I certainly am open to whomever he decides to nominate. My job as a senator is to evaluate the qualifications of that person under the advice and consent role.
You say that it's clumsy, but isn't it, Senator Durbin pointed out, isn't it exactly what President Reagan did when he said he would appoint a woman to the Supreme Court? Isn't it exactly what President Trump did when he said he would appoint a woman to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Actually, it isn't exactly the same. I've looked at what was done in both cases, and what President Biden did was, as a candidate, make this pledge, and that helped politicize the entire nomination process. What President Reagan said is, as one of his Supreme Court justices, he would like to appoint a woman, and he appointed a highly qualified one in Sandra Day O'Connor.
Isn't this process politicized no matter what you do? I mean, look at what happened after the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Barrett pushed through in record time. One of the reasons I suppose you voted against her.
Actually, the reason I voted against...
I can't listen to this anymore. I mean, it's unbelievable. First off, I am fascinated by how thinly she's slicing this. Reagan pledged that one of his choices would be Biden supposedly saying that every choice that he's going to make is going to be a black woman. Let's go back. Now, Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong. Back in 1980, the presidential elections still took place in that first Tuesday in November, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, this is from I believe, October 14th, 1980. So that would be when Ronald Reagan was still a candidate.
Thus politicizing this.
Well, let's play this clip and find out. I just wanted to make sure that I got the timeline correct here.
Polls continuing to show he runs better among men than women. Reagan took a dramatic step today to reach out for female support.
Now, I'm announcing today that one of the first Supreme Court vacancies in my administration
will be filled by the most qualified woman I can possibly find. One who meets the high standards I will demand for all court appointments. It's time for a woman to sit among our highest jurists.
Reagan acknowledged that his opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment has hurt him with some women, but said today's announcement shows his commitment to equal opportunity. Today's Supreme Court announcement was a bold step for a campaign that...
That was Chris Wallace, who ended up on Fox News, incidentally.
How? I didn't even recognize him there.
Oh, yeah. He wound up decades later. So, but I guess she was saying the difference was he wasn't politicizing because he said one of the first instead of the first.
Even though it's in the context of me struggling with women on a campaign.
Right. Very unpolitical of Ronald Reagan. And I can't imagine, can you imagine anybody politicizing the idea of the Supreme Court? It's not like, do we have Donald Trump? Should we pull up one of the multiple instances where he waived a list of people that he was going to choose from? Like literally, here's the organization, Heritage Foundation, includes 5 heritage recommendations.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, we could see the list of candidates. Never mind, from what perspective. Here are the specific people. It's just absurd.
But what makes this different, though, Sam?
I can only imagine.
It's just odd, right? These circumstances seem to be quite similar, except for there's one difference here, the addition of the word black.
Well, yes, and of course, then it makes it all like affirmative action. It's just
that's
a coincidence.
The point, though. That's why they're drumming up that exact. I mean, they are good at getting grassroots outrage about court appointments and about the Supreme Court, which is not something that the Democrats are able to do. And what's an easy shorthand for that, or a shortcut? Okay, if you don't like the fact that the black person at your job got promoted ahead of you, you feel like you're more deserved, you're struggling with your employment situation, you see these black people getting ahead. That's exactly what they're tapping into, and Susan Collins is no different from the rest of the Republicans.
Of course, but you also got to remember the Obama cell phone. That's also right. the cell phone, the slush fund for the cell phone. And you should also note that it was a complete coincidence that there was only the 2 most qualified people in the country when Donald Trump became president, which just happened to be white guys in their 40s. I guess maybe Gorsuch was 50.
Well, how about Coney Barrett? She was super qualified, right? She must have been a judge for many, 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 many years.
Many, many days, sort of. So there it is. We're going to hear more of this as we go on. It'll be interesting. Was it Wicker that came out and said this is an affirmative action pick? That way you get
Clarence
both
Thomas,
flavors. You get both flavors of the Republican Party. The ones who will say it explicitly and the ones who will say it, politely. We're going to take we'll be back in just a moment with Jonathan M. Katz. He's the proprietor of the Racket newsletter, author of Gangsters of Capitalism, Smedley Butler, the Marines, and the Making and Breaking of America's Empire. But first, as you know, we're in a new year. No better way to kick off 2022 than making sure you're feeling like your best self. And that includes staying hydrated with Liquid IV. I've told you this many times before. 1 stick of Liquid IV in 16 ounces of water hydrates you faster and more efficiently than water alone. Plus, Liquid IV has incredible hydration flavors like watermelon, which happens to be one of my favorite, lemon lime, strawberry, which I know you like.
I do.
Pina colada, which also happens to be one of my favorite. Right now, I am enjoying the tangerine, which has a little bit of an immunity boost. I guess they put more vitamins.
And for everybody out there, if you are drinking, that's the best. That's my usage for it. If I'm had a little bit too much to drink that night, it'll be incredibly effective for preventing a hangover.
Liquid IV contains 5 essential vitamins: B3, B5, B6, B12. And vitamin C. I think it's the B's that actually help you with that. With Liquid IV, you get 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. And Liquid IV is made with premium ingredients, non-GMO, free from gluten, dairy, and soy. Science of cellular transport technology is what makes Liquid IV so effective. It's designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other key ingredients into the bloodstream. Liquid IV is on a mission to change the world. The company's donated over 19 million servings globally. I'm going to be going on a trip in February. And so when I get on a plane, or I'm about to, and after, keep yourself hydrated. It's going to be the first time on a plane for a couple of years for me. We'll see. But also, like I say, like Emma said, there's something if you're overindulging, good to have. For me, it's just my daily now regimen. Stay hydrated. I drink a ton of Liquid IV during our shows. Sometimes it's this one, and the other one I go to is the, what is it, the matcha ginger, and it's got a little bit of an energy boost. So there you go. Check it out. Grab Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco. You can get 25% off, though, when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code MajorityRep. MajorityRep at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order when you use promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today. Liquidiv.com. Promo code MajorityRep. Check it out. They got a bunch of different flavors, actually, these days, so you should check that out. Meanwhile, everybody wants a little extra time. I certainly do. And a little extra money. Well, if you have many things to mail, you're spending a lot of time going to the post office, and you can save that time by sitting in your home or your office and ship online at stamps.com. It's the place where you get the services of the post office and UPS all in one place. All you got to do, use your computer to print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. And once your mail is ready, you just schedule a pickup or you just drop it off. That's right. What time is it? It's 2 a.m. I think it's time for me to send out some of these DVDs. What time is it? It's 4 a.m. I'm going to print out. I mean, I don't know why you're doing it at that time, but.
Why are you sending a bunch of DVDs?
Well, back when the show started, I sent a bunch of DVDs
no,
with
stamps.com.
I understand. But I guess people aren't doing that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm old.
Just aging yourself.
I guess that's true.
Fun.
I guess, yeah. Sending NFTs. With stamps.com, you get discounts up to 40% off post office rates and up to 62% off of UPS shipping rates. It's no wonder why nearly 1 million small businesses already use stamps.com. Folks, this is super easy. If you have any type of small business, or you find out yourself, sending a lot of packages or mail, nothing could be easier than printing out your own postage. So you can stop wasting your time leaving your office or your home. Don't wait in line. Go to stamps.com instead. There's no risk. And with my promo code Majority Report, you get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale. Just go to stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, type in Majority Report. That's stamps.com, promo code Majority Report. Stamps.com. Never leave your office or your home again. I don't know.
That sounds nice to me.
Honestly, it's freezing cold out.
I didn't leave
my
apartment all weekend. I would have used Stamps. I need to use Stamps.com.
Lastly, tell you that 90% of employers plan to make enhancing the employee experience a top priority in 2022. Makes sense. Certainly try it. We got the water cooler. That helped. A happy workplace is the key to attracting and keeping great employees. We did that around here with the water cooler.
I was threatening to quit.
Yeah, and you're like, where's the free water? Well, there it is.
Yeah.
It's right there. We got a ton of it. We just got to figure out how to schedule it now because we got a lot of backlog, but if we ever get locked up in here. But the bottom line is, if you need to add more employees to your team, ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter's matching technology helps you find the right people for your roles fast. Right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter uses its powerful technology to find and match the right candidates up with your job. Then what it does is it proactively presents these candidates to you. You can easily review these recommended candidates and invite your top choices to apply for your job. And that, of course, encourages them to apply faster. ZipRecruiter's technology is so effective that 4 out of 5 employers who posts it on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. I know this to be the case because that is how we got Brendan, still with us, still does a little bit of work for the show. Then we got Bradley through Brendan. So really, I mean,
the transitive property.
Exactly. But ZipRecruiter was, they must have been advertising with us for a while. So I gave it a try, and it was incredibly effective. I interviewed a bunch of people. They have a great interface so you can organize them. And ZipRecruiter sort of reached out and got Brendan, sort of found Brendan where he was and had him apply. Worked out very well for us. Find the right employees for your workplace with ZipRecruiter. You can try it for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority, MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter. It's the smartest way to hire. And a good time to look for employees, frankly, is when you don't need them. You can build a little bit of a bank, get a sense of who's out there and what they can do. So check it out. All right. Want to welcome to the program Jonathan M. Katz. He's the proprietor of the Racket newsletter, author of Gangsters of Capitalism, Smedley Butler, the Marines, and the Making and Breaking of America's Empire. Do we have him? Jonathan, welcome to the show. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Doing great. How about you?
Doing great. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being. Thank you for being here in my house.
Yes. Well, glad to be here. So I, have had a vague awareness of Smedley Butler probably now almost 18 years. My old co-host at the Majority Report was sort of obsessed with Smedley Butler and his proclamations. War was a racket, particularly was something we would talk about as we, had just entered into a war with Iraq. And so I just found his life story fascinating. And when we were talking before the show, I said, this guy's he's sort of like the Forrest Gump of U.S. imperialism. And I don't want to say that. And then I read an interview where you brought that up, so I felt vindicated. But yeah, let's just start before we go through. And it's a great way to learn about so much of what we deal with now, 115 years later, what the sort of, at least the sort of, the origin stories of our relationship with these countries is today in terms of imperialism. But give us just a broad overview of Smedley Butler first, and then we'll go into some of the specifics.
Yeah, so Smedley Butler was, in short, he was a Marine. He was a lot of things. He was a Quaker from Philadelphia. He lied about his age at 16 to join the Marine Corps in 1898. We were at war in Cuba with the Spanish Empire. And from there, he was Forrest Gump, like you said. I mean, he was in every U.S. invasion, occupation, intervention, overseas war from basically 1898 until the eve of the Second World War. He retired a major general, which was the highest rank available to Marines at the time. He was a celebrity. He was beloved by his Marines. He was twice the recipient of the Medal of Honor, which is a very big deal. But then he spent the last 10 years of his life as an anti-war, anti-imperialist activist who, among other things, blew the whistle on a alleged fascist coup to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt in 1934.
I mean, one of the things I love about this book is it's a great way for folks to get an overview of our of this era when it feels like, we were also talking what this is what you would, sort of like the sequel to Manifest Destiny. It's like we ran out of territory to colonize in this country. And so we said, we started to look to other places. Is that basically the story of at least that first 20 years of the 20th century?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one way to tell it. I mean, I talk in the book about Frederick Jackson's frontier thesis, which basically, in the 1890s, the superintendent of the U.S. Census declared that the frontier was, for all intents and purposes, closed. And at that moment, there was all this turmoil going on in the United States. There was a big economic depression in 1893, and a lot of elites were afraid. They saw socialism coming, they saw anarchism coming, and they were afraid that, the America that they knew was going to change. And Turner offered this idea that basically, he called it free land, but basically through the conquest and ethnic cleansing of native lands in the western part of North America, that this had created the American character, by which he meant essentially the white American character. And based on that idea, these new opportunities presented themselves with essentially this war against the Spanish Empire and the dissolution of the Spanish Empire. And there were other thinkers at the time who were envisioning a huge American Navy, American merchant fleets, getting rich, selling things to China. And all of these ideas kind of came together at once, and it turned us from essentially, a continental empire into a global empire.
So Butler's first foray is into the Spanish-American War, which is essentially for Cuba. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, just walk us through that. I mean, this is, there was some sense, I think, by the Cubans who were trying to become independent, maybe a strong sense, certainly as articulated by Martí, who was, I think the Cubans perceive him as like we do George Washington on some level, that it was going to be a problem because the United States was going to come and they weren't going to leave. And to some extent, that was 100% true.
Yeah. I mean, there were Cuban exiles at the time, sort of, Cuban Ahmed Chalabis of like the late 19th century, who wanted the United States to get involved. So they had been at war. The Cubans had been fighting for their independence for basically 30 years at that point. They'd fought a war, lost it, fought another war, lost it. And then Martí comes in 1895 and starts another war. And each time they had been making more progress, and they were getting very close to achieving their independence on their own. Some Cuban exiles wanted the Americans to get involved, and so they were trying to recruit the Jingos, as they were known, Teddy Roosevelt and American capitalists from the Northeast. And Jose Martí was in the United States. He was like going around to like Cuban exile communities and trying to raise money, and he bought guns and put fighters on a boat in Florida, and they were interdicted at sea actually by the Coast Guard. It's a whole story. But Martí, as you say, like he was very worried, and he warned a friend of his in Mexico that they needed to win their independence fast, because if they didn't, the United States was going to get involved. And then, as you said, not only was he warning that the United States would never leave Cuba, but that this would be the beginning of a conquest of Latin America, which, in some sense continues to this day. Martí didn't live to see it. He died in his very first battle, but he warned it.
What was Smedley Butler's perspective at that time, and what role did he play in that specific conflict?
Yeah, so Butler was, he's a teenager. Like he was a rich kid on the main line in Philadelphia, and he was reading the newspapers, and he was caught up sort of in the war hysteria that everybody else was. Some people, I'm sure people remember the Maine, right? So the USS Maine goes to protect U.S. interests in the middle of this essentially civil war or war of independence between the Cubans and their Spanish colonizers. It blows up. Nobody still exactly knows why. The U.S. government actually isn't the one who blames the Spanish. It's really the media. It's kind of popular hysteria that blames the Spanish government for having done this. And Butler, he's 16, like a lot of 16-year-olds, like 16-year-olds after 9/11. They got caught up in the patriotic fervor, and he wanted to suit up. He wanted to join up. He actually goes to the Army first. They reject him because he's a kid. But the Marines are just ramping up for their first overseas war. The Marines up to that point had basically been, sort of a rump force of the Navy. They were kind of glorified ship guards. And as the Army is gearing itself up to stop fighting the wars against the native peoples in North America and invade Cuba, while they're trying to figure out how to get people on boats, the Marines are the one branch that already knows how to do this, and they're willing to take anyone they can get, even a scrawny 16-year-old who had never fired a gun before, as far as I can tell, from a Quaker from Philly.
And we should say, ultimately, what comes out of that is not only a sort of ongoing client state for the next 50 years or so in Cuba, but the Platt Amendment. Just tell us what the Platt Amendment is, and from then we should also say Guantanamo is born.
Exactly. So the short answer is, I feel like we're doing the AP high school history class.
Well, I mean, that honestly, I mean, I think that's like,
totally.
That is the thing that I really appreciate about the book, is that it gives sort of, it's like a tour of the imperialism of that day.
I guess I'm being self-conscious. I want to make sure I'm not boring people at home by talking about.
No. That's what we have you here.
So basically, the decision to go to war. There's actually a fight in Congress between essentially two groups of racist people. So there's the expansionists, the Teddy Roosevelt camp, that they just want to conquer Cuba. And then there are the isolationists who at that point are, for the most part, kind of neo-Confederates. Some of them were actual members of the Confederate Army themselves. And they're worried about conquering Cuba and then getting a bunch of non-white Catholic, Spanish speakers into the United States. And again, like, this is sort of a theme of this moment, but there were I mean, these are architects of Jim Crow, and they're worried about changing the ethnic makeup and racial balance of the United States. And so as a compromise in the declaration of war, there's an amendment called the Teller Amendment, sponsored by a senator, that says we are going to go to war here, but we are prohibiting ourselves from conquering the island of Cuba. But as this war ends, we now have a bunch of troops in Cuba, and as you say, we're setting up a client state, and the compromise to the compromise is another amendment by a powerful senator named Orville Platt, stuffed into an appropriations bill that says, okay, we're not conquering you as a colony, but you have to do what we say. We get final say over decisions of your government. We can, invade anytime we feel like it, and we do. And we get to keep any land as we see fit for naval bases, for what were known at the time as coaling stations. And the big one was the one that Smedley Butler arrives at. It's the first place that the Americans land in 1898. The Marines take the beachhead. Smedley Butler is in basic training basically at that point, but he comes a couple of weeks later. It's Guantanamo Bay, and it's the Platt Amendment. Long story short, there's actually sort of there's a little wrinkle in the mid 20th century, because we sort of substitute another law for it, but it's essentially the same law. It's that amendment. It's that concept that makes the United States so Cuba stays the nominal landlord, but the United States becomes the renter in perpetuity, and we can't be kicked out. We're sort of a super renter, because it's up to us if we break the lease. And that's why we still have Guantanamo Bay, and it's that weird legal, weirdness that, because it's Cuban land, but they can't kick us out, and the Americans run it. That's this sort of neither fish nor fowl status that the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, takes advantage of after 9/11 to create the forever prison, which is still operating there. And it's a place where we can at least tell ourselves that international law and US law and Cuban law, there's no law there, no law applies. And that's what it enables us to do the torture and the indefinite detention and just violate all the constitutional principles that we violate in creating the Guantanamo prison camp.
And if folks want to understand sort of the so-called isolationist argument in that instance, that really is just isolationist insofar as like we don't want to conquer that. We don't want them to be a territory. You almost see the same thing playing out when it was a question of Afghan refugees coming into this country, a couple of months ago, when you had people complaining that we were going to have to absorb all these Afghan refugees from the war, and we're one of the aware that they're there, right?
One of the themes that runs through all of these wars up to the present day, and one of the reasons why this period is so interesting to me is because the wars in Butler's day, the imperial wars, are just they're very much of a piece with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria and all these other forever wars that are going on, and the same concepts that we sort of cook up then in these fights that are happening then, these compromises still carry through to the present day, which is basically like, we want their resources, we want their stuff, we want to be able to do whatever we please without any accountability, with just total impunity, but we don't want them. They should stay there. And then once we're done with them, and we're seeing this in Afghanistan now, that's it. Sorry, you're on your own. Good luck.
So you follow Butler to from Guantanamo, then to the Philippines, then into the Boxer War, and then back to the Philippines, into Central America, Nicaragua, Panama, and in Mexico, and Veracruz, and Haiti. Give us which one of those conflicts, or which couple of those conflicts, do you think is the most relevant in terms of Butler's, perspective on what they were doing changing?
That's an interesting question. So, I would say so Nicaragua is the first place that I see evidence of him sort of taking a look around and starting to question the motives of the people who were sending him into war. So Nicaragua, he goes 3 times. He's based in the Panama Canal Zone, which he and the Marines had also helped conquer as sort of an American colony, as we helped force the secession of Panama from Colombia for purposes of building the Panama Canal. But he's doing these sorties up from the Canal Zone to Nicaragua, and a couple of things are happening at that moment. The one is on a political level. We're moving into what's known as dollar diplomacy, where because I was talking about like this compromise over the not annexing Cuba. That didn't apply in the Philippines. So we just full out colonized the Philippines. We take it. It's a wholly owned colony for 50 years, and it's a very expensive and very costly and very bloody war. And the Taft administration, which has now taken power in the States, is looking for other ways to do things, on the cheap, on the sly, a little out, because there's also a backlash to the Philippine-American War, much as there's a backlash to the Iraq War in our own day. And Nicaragua is offering them an opportunity to do things differently. So instead of declaring war, instead of colonizing Nicaragua, the government, the U.S. government, basically puts out a tender to some banks to set up a national bank of Nicaragua and take over the country's finances. And by doing that, we're going to control Nicaragua. We're going to install a puppet president who's actually the accountant for an American mining firm. And we're going to do that with the muscle of the Marines. So this is known as dollar diplomacy. So that's one thing that's changing. The other thing that's changing on a personal level for Smedley Butler is that he's now a major, which gives him a lot more latitude to make his own decisions about where he goes, who he talks to. He decides when he gets off the boat himself and sort of goes on this sightseeing tour of Nicaragua, and he's able to talk to members of the Nicaraguan elite. He's able to meet all these American capitalists, all these wildcat financiers, as he calls them, who've come down looking for a payday. and he's able to see what's going on. And it's sort of at that moment when he starts saying things like, well, we're only down here because Brown Brothers Bank, has some money down here. And I don't know, whose bright idea was this anyway? It doesn't keep him from doing anything. It doesn't keep him from, he kills a lot of people, and he makes decisions that, continue, affecting Nicaraguans to this day. But that's a moment when I think that's a moment when things start changing for him.
So he's gone through the Philippine-U.S. war at that point, which was essentially to open up a commercial trading outpost for Asia for the United States. Does he retroactively reassess that war once he's in a position in Nicaragua to get a sense of what the dynamics were? And he's looked by now, he's getting a chance to look behind the curtain. Is he reassessing what he had seen in front of the curtain in the Philippines based upon what he had seen behind the curtain in Nicaragua?
It takes time. It takes more time than that for him. He ultimately does. I mean, he ultimately, in the 1930s, calls for the United States to give the Philippines their independence. For two reasons. One, because he thinks that, they deserve it. And the other is because he sees that a war is coming with Japan over the Philippines, over America's colonies in the Pacific, including Hawaii, including Guam. But the Philippines is it's the big prize. I mean, today there are 150 million people in the Philippines. It's a huge expanse of land and, thousands of islands. But while he's in Nicaragua, he's not yet thinking that globally. I mean, so from Nicaragua, he then, as you noted, he invades Mexico at the behest of American oil companies. He goes on a spy run in Mexico investigating, regime change there. And he then goes to Haiti, which is really where that's kind of the apotheosis of his career. And it's where I encountered him first, right? Because I was the Associated Press correspondent in Haiti for 3.5 years. I was there during the earthquake in 2010. And that was kind of how I came to his story, because in Haiti, he's known as the devil. He's known as in Creole, they call him méchant, like he's the most evil of the Marines. So he's not yet quite, he's starting to put two and two together, but he's not quite there yet. And he talks about that in later on in the 1930s, when he starts doing this anti-war writing, when he writes War as a Racket, and he writes this series of articles. It's actually sometimes confused for War as a Racket in a socialist magazine called Common Sense. He talks about how, I didn't have an original thought in my head, the whole time I was in the Marine Corps. There's a part of Gangsters of my book where I talk about the imperial history of zombies, which we can get into if you want. But the zombies are introduced into American culture because of the U.S. occupation of Haiti, and really, in large part because of the work of Smedley Butler. And and I kind of there's kind of a comparison to be made there between sort of the way that the Nigerian band leader Fela Kuti, the way he sees zombies as sort of being like mindless drones, and drone warfare, right? And Butler kind of retroactively sees himself like that. I think maybe he's being a little too convenient there with his excuses. I think he was making decisions for himself and deciding, he was deciding who to kill and who not to kill, what hills to climb up, at what hills not to charge up. But yeah, it isn't instantaneous like that, because he's, honestly, he still has a lot to gain personally from being a Marine. I mean, it's still core to his identity. He's gaining fame. He's winning the acclaim and the approval of his fellow Marines and ultimately the American public. Sorry. I wish that I could say that he looks around. He's like, oh, I'm in Nicaragua. One of the things that he does is he bivouacs half of his Marines in the National Bank of Nicaragua, which is chartered in Connecticut. And this is like one of the things where he's like, I think we're not actually here for democracy. I think we're here for this bank that I'm literally housing my Marines inside. I wish I could say that he then is like, oh, I'm going to go back and work for the decolonization of the Philippines immediately. But no, it takes more time than that. He's part of this. He's part of the structure, and that's a thing that continues for a couple decades more.
And this history of him being, pretty vicious throughout these occupations, I guess, in these wars and these invasions, is pretty stunning. There was one quote that I'd like you to just expand on by a mayor in a Philippines town. I think it was Balogia. I think
Balangiga.
Balagiga, that when you look back on that era, you need to remember and forget at the same time. What does that mean?
Yeah. So okay, so as you know, like I go to Balangiga, I go to all the places essentially that Butler and the Marines invaded to sort of figure out what the memory of this time is. And Balangiga is a horrendous moment in American history that not a lot of Americans know about. So the Marines, Butler's actually not with these Marines because he would have been with them, but he contracts typhoid in China, basically putting down the Boxer Rebellion, which is a popular anti-foreign rebellion just before this. But his mentor, Littleton Waller, who is just an outright white supremacist. So in this town of Balangiga, there is a massacre of occupying American soldiers. And in revenge, I think 48 of them are killed, along with 20 some insurgents from Balangiga, and it's on the island of Samar, so like other Samaranians. And in revenge for this killing, the American general, a guy named Jake Smith, Howland Jake Smith, who has cut his teeth in the the so-called Indian Wars in North America, orders the Marines in to basically commit essentially a genocide against the people of Samar and to turn the island of Samar, in his words, into a howling wilderness. And when I go to Balangiga, I'm not sure like what people are going to remember there, like what kind of signs of memory there are going to be. And I get to town, and there is the craziest monument that I've ever seen. It is a basically like a life-size diorama, like a group of statues of American soldiers at their breakfast table as the Balangiga insurgents are storming their mess tent with machetes to commit this massacre. And in Balangiga, one of the big ways in which this massacre is remembered, the revenge massacre, is that when the Americans come and massacre them in revenge, we take these church bells and we take them back to the United States. And as of when I was in Balangiga in 2017, they had not yet been returned. And so, as you say, so I sit down with the mayor of this town. And I'm like, and I'm asking sort of, so how do you remember these things? Like, clearly this is a big deal. You have this statue of the massacre in the middle of your town. You have pictures of the bells, the Balangiga bells, like on your wall office. There's like a yearly like marathon. There's this pageant that I see a video of where they reenact all of these things, including the massacre of the Americans and the revenge massacre of the people in Balangiga. And then he's talking to me about his life. And he has a brother who's a Marine who's in the United States Marines. He has other siblings who are like living in the United States. And I'm asking him, so I'm an American, right? Like I've come to your town. I'm an inheritor of this legacy of the people who just slaughtered your people and were ordered to kill all males over the age of 10. Anybody capable of carrying a rifle was the instruction. I was like, well, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you deal with having, a sibling in the Marines, siblings in the United States? And he was like, well, I have to forget. Like, you have to move on. And I was like, but you also said that it's important to remember. Like, you have this statue, you do this pageant every year. Like, it's almost as if you have to remember and forget at the same time. And without hesitation, he just says yes. And I think that, that is a thing that it pervades the book. It exists in a lot of places that I go, because these relationships between the places that we colonize, the places that we still sort of, to a certain extent, de facto colonize in some cases, it's really complicated, because people who live in these places, they look to America as a land of wealth, as, to some extent, a land of opportunity. They have their own problems at home. I mean, in the Philippines, you have Duterte, who's essentially, kind of a dictator. He's certainly an authoritarian. While I'm there, he's undertaking this, process of, kind. I don't want to call it a genocide, but it's just mass extrajudicial killing of the poor under the pretense of a so-called war on drugs. They're seeing Duterte, move their country closer to the authoritarian regime in China. And there's memory of the United States coming in at the end of this war that we helped cause through this imperial rivalry with Japan, but we come in sort of and act as liberators, kill a lot of people, but act as liberators from the Japanese, who they also remember as being, a horrible, murderous imperial power. And the only way that they can reconcile themselves with, feeling any kind of affinity or any kind of closeness to the United States is by sort of putting these things in the past. But they also can't put them in the past. They don't want to put them in the past, because they also, first of all, they happened. Second of all, these stories have been passed down to them. And third of all, they acquire some kind of meaning from this, right? They encounter a kind of communal feeling within themselves by remembering these atrocities in their past, just as anybody remembers, gets a feeling of themselves by remembering the ways in which their people have been wronged in the past. And so it's the process of remembering and forgetting at the same time. I mean, I think it is. Franz Fanon writes about this. A lot of writers of who talk about the colonial experience talk about this, but there's kind of a double consciousness that has to operate in one's head at the same time, where you're sort of you're remembering these horrors and you're also forgetting them to allow yourself to move on. It's a really, really tricky process, and I saw it everywhere. I saw it in place after place after place that I went.
It seems much easier for the Americans, because all we've done is forgotten. Yes. All we do is, I mean, I mean, there's so much more in terms of our involvement in these countries that I think, I want to encourage people to read. But let's jump up to the other sort of I guess, a famous aspect of Smedley Butler's life that we've also completely, for the most part, willfully forgotten, it seems to me. And I think, again, so much of this, so much of what we've forgotten that Smedley Butler sort of represented, both sort of pre his awareness of how American imperialism was functioning and what role he played in it, and post, is because there was a lot of entrenched oligarchic, if you want to say, interests who really didn't want this history to be exposed, because to a certain extent it allows for the maintenance of this same sort of operations. And I'm in this instance, I'm specifically talking about Butler comes back. He begins to become disenchanted, and before he starts getting very vocal about this, right? Because, had this gone down 5 years later or so, well, I guess I want to get a sense from you in terms of what was the catalyst. But he's approached in 1933. He's not public yet, right? At this point, with his disillusionment right?
No. I mean, no. Yeah, he's been court-martialed for insulting Benito Mussolini. He's going on kind of a speaking tours where he's kind of scandalizing audiences by talking about some of the things that he's done. But no, he's not yet. War as a Racket is not written yet. He's not out with really like the full-blown criticism of the United States and of U.S. foreign policy.
So he's approached by this guy, Gerald McGuire, who is representing, I don't know if it's specifically the Liberty League or just like sort of a crew of capitalists who are very worried about FDR's New Deal, that it's too socialistic, that they're giving away the farm, essentially. Is he approached because he had been court-martialed, like, let's find a guy who we think is aligned to us, but has been sort of unfairly treated by, whatever in some way? I mean, is that what the theory was?
That's an interesting piece of it, I think. It's hard to say because Jerry Maguire dies very soon after, and so he never says exactly what he was thinking. But I think so. It's a couple of things. One is that what Maguire is approaching him to do is to head up a coup, to basically lead an armed mob into Washington D.C. up Pennsylvania Avenue to intimidate Franklin Roosevelt into either resigning or delegating all his powers to a cabinet secretary. And they're doing this for the purpose of overturning the New Deal, which they know is popular and isn't going to lose at the ballot box. And I think that there are a couple of things that I think we can point to as being reasons why Butler might have been approached. One is that Butler had a long track record of overthrowing governments using armed force, right? So, in Haiti, for instance, where he was for several years, he overthrows, he dissolves a parliament at gunpoint for the purpose of forcing through a constitution that's going to allow Americans to own land in Haiti and have like American corporations make money there. But he's also, he's also overthrown governments in Nicaragua. His Marines, are responsible for the rise of Somoza, the Nicaraguan dictator, Rafael Trujillo, who's the dictator in the Dominican Republic, et cetera. And Jerry Maguire's boss, a guy named Grayson N.P. Murphy, and this is something that I found in my research. He was a former military intelligence official who had been all over the world. He was in the Philippines. He was in Panama during the secession plot, which Sullivan and Cromwell, the big imperialist law firm, which still exists, which some people may know because of the involvement of John Foster and Allen Dulles, right? Where Sullivan and Cromwell partners with United Fruit. They helped overthrow Jacobo Arbenz, the president of Guatemala in 1954. So Butler has this sort of track record of overthrowing governments. But as you note, he's a maverick. I mean, he's been court-martialed for insulting Benito Mussolini in 1931. In 1932. There's this episode called The Bonus March, where basically a bunch of veterans of the First World War come to Washington to demand federal benefits that they had been promised. They stage essentially kind of like, Occupy Washington 1932. And the establishment kind of lines up against them. They see them as, degenerates. Douglas MacArthur accuses them as being, communists, trying to hatch a communist.
We should say, like, there's amazing photographs of like all the tents pitched in, I think it's the Washington, the monument. What do you call it? The
mall.
Mall.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty impressive. But
and actually, this ends up with Douglas MacArthur and the army burning the camp to the ground. George Patton, who was a major at that time, a cavalry officer, leads a cavalry charge into this camp. But in the middle of this demonstration, this month-long demonstration, 9 days actually before the army invades the camp, Butler goes and he sides with the bonus marchers. He gives them this rousing speech where he says, this is the greatest example of Americanism that I've ever saw. Stand your ground. He said, don't back up, because as soon as you back up, I mean, he's giving great protesting advice. Actually, he's saying as soon as you break your camp, all of this evaporates into thin air, and nobody's going to even remember that you were here. So stay here until you get what you want. And I think that to a certain extent, the business plotters, Jerry Maguire, Grayson Murphy, his boss, they miscalculate badly, and they get the politics completely wrong. Maybe they don't have enough class analysis. They don't understand that Butler is there fighting on behalf of the poor, impoverished, working veteran who's suffering from the Great Depression. All they see is this guy who's overthrown governments overseas, this guy who missed out on becoming commandant of the Marine Corps and has a chip on his shoulder, and this guy who is on these newsreels, giving this rousing speech to some of the exact veterans who they want to come to Washington to participate in this coup. And they love him. They're hanging on every word. He's old Gimlet Eye. He's this beloved general.
They perceive him as being anti-establishment as opposed to having an ideology. Exactly. And assume if he's anti-establishment, he'd be willing to help us stage a coup. He certainly has the skill set to stage a coup against FDR. It's just they didn't realize that he was more ideologically sympathetic with what FDR was doing than they had assumed.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, and I just wanted to take it into the hearings. There were hearings about this. This was not like an apocryphal story. There was hearings, there was testimony, and on some level, it was buried. I mean, there's a quality to this that is there was a lot of people who didn't want there to be a broad sort of understanding that there was I don't know what you would call it, a capitalist coup attempt, essentially.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that them missing the politics it's classic fascism, because and we honestly we see it today on the fascist right in America. It's this idea that it's we're elites, but we're anti-establishment. We're anti-establishment elites. We're anti-us elites. It's this thing that it comes right out of sort of the foundations of fascism in Italy, as sort of this thing that kind of Mussolini kind of grows out of this socialist movement. But he's but we're going to do socialism, but without class. We're going to do socialism, but the rich keep their money, and we'll just keep. The important thing is violence and regimentedness, it's hard to say, because, as you say, this gets buried really by Congress. We don't know exactly, how many people were involved in it beyond Jerry Maguire, this bond salesman, member of the American Legion, who comes to recruit Butler, and almost certainly his boss, Grayson Murphy. Maguire tells Butler, you alluded earlier to this thing, the Liberty League. So Maguire tells Butler that there's going to be this group of businessmen who are going to kind of come out, in a couple of weeks from when they're talking in August 1934, to back this thing financially. That they're going to sort of be, he calls them the villagers in the opera. And Butler, immediately pegs this as the Liberty League, which is a group of businessmen. It's founded by the DuPonts, Irene DuPont, of the DuPont Corporation, Alfred P. Sloan of General Motors, Phillips Oil, Sun Oil, the McCann Erickson Ad Agency, like all these guys.
J.P. Morgan involved in this as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And Grayson Murphy, who is McGuire's boss, is the treasurer of the Liberty League, which is one of the things that gives this even more credence. And the thing that we know is that the Liberty Leaguers, like, they love fascism. They love fascism. I mean, Thomas Lamont, who is the head of J.P. Morgan at that time, along with J.P. Morgan Jr., Lamont describes himself as something of a missionary for Mussolini. And he makes J.P. Morgan sort of, like the official overseas bank of the Italian fascists. It is certainly highly plausible. Almost, I mean, look, for these guys at this moment, it's 1934. Liberal democracy, has been horribly discredited, first by the previous World War and second by the Depression. And they're kind of looking around and they're like, look, the only ways forward are, the world is either going to go communist red or fascist black. And we definitely don't want communism because that's going to hurt us as rich people. So let's go with fascism. And, it makes perfect sense that they would recruit Butler. And I'm kind of droning on, but there's an even closer parallel in France in February 1934, where there's this sort of riot of far right and fascist groups that stormed the French Parliament. It's really the closest historical antecedent to what happened on January 6th, which we can go into if you want. But, and McGuire goes to Paris, he meets with one of the leading fascist groups that took part in this riot, and then comes to Butler and says, this is the group that we're going
Here's
to
the model.
have. Exactly.
Model.
And they go to Congress, and Congress does a very cursory investigation. But they don't follow through. And I think that, part of the reason they don't follow through is because it would require, holding some very powerful, very rich Americans accountable. And Congress then, as now, has an allergy to that.
Somebody stepped in. I mean, somebody must have stepped in at that point and said, like, this investigation's gone on far enough. You have your couple of. One of the stories I love out of this, too, is that there was some sense that Prescott Bush, this is George Herbert Walker's Bush's dad, was somehow involved in this. But it turns out that he was so aligned with the Nazis at that point that he was just too officially fascist to take part in this fascist attack. There was some confusion in the aughts. There was like a BBC documentary, and then there was like a blog post written off of it. It sort of misunderstood what they were saying in the documentary. What it was this committee that investigates the business plot. It's a committee headed by John W. McCormack, who ends up becoming Speaker of the House, and Samuel Dickstein, two Democrats, and they're investigating all kinds of fascist involvement. Their remit is to sort of investigate all forms of Nazi propaganda and not, attempts at fascist infiltration in the United States, as well as some communist infiltration. It's HUAC, actually. It's the predecessor to the House Un-American Activities Committee. And they were investigating another thing that involved Prescott Bush's bank, which, by the way, was Brown Brothers, at that point, Brown Brothers Harriman. So the same bank that Butler was basically fighting on their behalf to overthrow democracy in Nicaragua in the 1930s, Brown Brothers is partnering with the actual living, German, National Socialist, Workers' Party. And so he was the subject of a different investigation by the same committee, but as far as I can tell, he was never involved in this particular plot. This plot was, totally homegrown and was sort of rejecting. They thought that sort of Nazi clicking heel fascism, it wasn't our style, it wasn't our aesthetic. Even they thought that even Mussolini's black shirts
weren't the sort of thing that Americans were going to get involved with. They were looking to France because France was an established old democracy that was a lot more like the United States. And, there were fascist currents, there were fascist uprisings in France, some of which, end up sort of taking power once the Nazis invade in the form of the Vichy government. And the business plotters, however many of them there were, they thought, and probably rightly, that the same thing could happen in the United States. Fascism's possible anywhere. You just have to find the right aesthetic to appeal to the right number of masses in the body politic.
But we're just about out of time. I just want to ask you this last question, and maybe sort of like, I've seen it always referred to as the business plot. Mm-hmm. But like, why? Like, what do you think is behind that? Because on some level, that term is just so generic that it really sort of obscures what's going on there. Because this wasn't business that was doing this, right? These were a far more specific set of interests. And I'm just curious as to like, what do you, having spent so much time with the history of this, like where did that moniker come from? Was that part of making it, something that we would lose consciousness of in the context of our country?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I actually don't know when that term originated. I've seen it also referred to as the Wall Street Putsch. I've heard some people refer to it as the banker's plot, which also is sort of generic. I actually, that's another thing. I mean, there are a lot, I spent 5 years writing this book. It's been 7 years in the making. And I went down every single rabbit hole that I could think of, but there's still other rabbit holes out there. And that's a good one. I will look into that, and maybe I'll do another article about it.
Well, it's a really important story, and Smedley Butler is a great sort of, I guess, a tent pole, or I'm not a clothesline, or just a host, I guess, of U.S. imperialism. And much of this, I mean, today, I just did this one quote that really just stuck out for me was, "I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in." That's ultimately Citibank.
That's still Citibank. Yep.
And I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Baking House of Brown Brothers in 1909, 1912, Prescott Bush. I mean, it really does give a great historical foundation for much of what we see today. Jonathan Katz, the book is Gangsters of Capitalism, Smedley Butler, the Marines, and the Making and Breaking of America's Empire. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It's great.
All right, going to head into the fun half of the program. It's coming up just a moment. You'll
just looking at you.
That really is. It's a great way to be introduced, I think, to our involvement, our imperialism, and specifically, from that era, which was sort of, you could also argue that the template is formed in this country as we push the indigenous people out and kill them and take over their land. But in terms of like the first time where we start to face this sort of like imperialism outwards, this is that era.
And it's also just like a real gut check for, there's a lot of fanciful notions about the United States being above colonialism as opposed to like the old powers of France and Great Britain. I mean, there are like, that's kind of how some people who are American exceptionalists perceive themselves, but it's just a reality check in that way.
Yeah, we just got into the game a little later. That's all. We were more innovative.
Yeah.
I mean, the Monroe Doctrine. This is all us. Stay out of it, guys.
Folks, a week or so ago, I did a podcast with Greg from Oklahoma on the Green Corn Rebellion show. We've been working on trying to get me on for quite some time, ages and ages. It takes me a long time. But check it out. I think we got the link, right, on YouTube to the Green Corn Rebellion show. Greg from Oklahoma. He's also running for state senate. So worth checking out.
I was on that last fall.
There you go.
We're trying to find a time. I'm going to go on soon.
It was fun. Very fun to do. So check that out. Also, don't forget, it is your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you support the free show, and you get the fun half. So check that out. And still some tickets left to the Majority Live, the big live show, which is now 3 months minus a day from the not anniversary of January 6th, because it's actually on May 15th in Boston at the Wilbur Theater. I know it's probably a little convoluted way to do it.
No, that was easy to follow.
Yes, of course. MajorityLive.com. You get your tickets there. Check that out. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Lakian media universe?
Yeah, David and I, for Left Reckoning patrons, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, talked to Kevin Bird. He's a radical scientist focused on evolution, plant genome stuff, I believe. But we talk about this new book, The Genetic Lottery, that purports to say actually social justice warriors should take a closer look at genetic science, and their PC-ness is causing them to overlook important stuff. And it turns out that that's not actually true.
Really?
And it's the exact same, it's a more polite version of, frankly, the Charles Murray argument. It's like, it tries to do it without racism, but ultimately there's not a lot there. And we talk about the long fight against genetic determinism, going back to Stephen Gould and the radical scientists in the 1970s and 80s.
Let's check that out, folks. Also, don't forget the AM Quickie, amquickie.com newsletter. It's exploding. At one point, we may go to, having it a tiered type of thing. So if you get in early, you're going to get we will definitely give you the better of the deals. Nice. So check it out, amquickie.com, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
oh my
We are back.
God, I saw that. We are back. 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920. Come shower with Crowder. The show is so much better post-Peacock. Would always feel like the interviews had to be fit into something smaller than they should have been. Appreciate you exploring the ideas in today's interview.
Sam, how did you write into the show via the IMs? I didn't even see you do that.
As I wrote to myself. Look, I can't, I share that sentiment, and I was frustrated by that dynamic at the time, and that was what we were going for when we no longer were doing the Peacock thing. I had made maybe some longer commitments, and but I do this show. You can't do. Let's put it this way. You can't do this for this long unless you have fun. And if there's anything, tiny things, like now it's like I'm like what's the pea in the princess or something like that, right? Like the pea, like there's a pea under like the pillow, and
right.
Like if there's anything that's like annoying me with the show, I can't, it's too hard at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So many people would say, "What's the big deal? They're licensing the show, and it's." All you got to do is just keep it at 55 minutes and, have a break here. And
right.
Some people would even argue, like, are you sure you don't have, are you sure you're not self-sabotaging yourself? Like, that's come up at times. And it's like, no, I want to do what I want to do. And whatever. It'll work out more often than not. Sometimes it doesn't, but so yes, I agree. Let me put it this way. I don't know how people absorb the show as an audience because I can't tell. But I know when I am enjoying it more, and that's now. That's now. Calling from a 614 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Jason from Columbus, Ohio.
Jason from Columbus, Ohio. What's on your mind?
I'm going to take you off speaker real quick. Follow the rules.
You.
Hi. Number one, I'm a Marine veteran, longtime listener, and you just have no idea how happy I am that you're covering the history of Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler is like a legend in the United States Marine Corps. I know sometimes, from the left we have kind of a disdain for the military, but like Smedley Butler is one of those special guys that actually stood up for, our country. Another ironic side note, he was a winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor not once but twice. Smedley Butler and the Bonus Rebellion and all of that stuff, some of that is actually taught at the Marine Corps recruit level, i.e. all the way down to the basic roots. And I really like you, Sam, and the Majority Report, the left in general, just Americans in general, really should learn this history because, this coup plot that we're facing right now, this has happened before. And if we don't do something, it'll happen again. And we should look to people like Smedley Butler as an example as to how to fight this. And, I'd love to hear any observations that you have about Smedley Butler, the Banana Wars, anything you got, talk on it, Sam. I love what you guys do.
All right. Appreciate the call. Thanks so much. Honestly, I think, we get a lot of calls like, what book would you recommend? And this, I feel like this book, just like as an overview of like history, there's not a huge amount of ideological analysis that's associated with this. Although I think you could tell from the interview that he's coming from a fairly skeptical perspective on U.S. imperialism and understands that there is a sort of a class dynamic to this. But for for entry into this, Smedley Butler is a great mechanism in which to go into this stuff. And I think Chomsky, used Smedley Butler quite a bit in some of his writings too. So that would be my recommendation there. Let's go one more call before we get to some IMs. Calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
I'm sorry, did you say 847?
I did say 847. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Okay, great. So, yesterday I heard you talking about or the clip online on YouTube. You mentioned children with long COVID, and I'm really glad you brought up long COVID because most political commentators I listen to who bring it up either bring it up, in passing, or bring it up and mainly only talk about the loss of taste and smell, or just some of the less, just not the whole picture when it comes to long COVID. So I was hoping I could talk to you about my experience with long COVID to try to raise awareness.
Sure, please do.
Okay, so I'm 19 years old and I'm a college student. My name's Paul. Just a year and a half ago, I caught COVID. This is before vaccines were widely available. And then immediately after my recovery, the 2-week recovery period, I started having some really bizarre symptoms, heart palpitations, a fluttering of the heart, fatigue, neurological symptoms like numbness of the feet, etc. And over time, I was kind of wondering what it was. This is before long COVID was very well known. And then, for those of you that are listening, I guess, that don't know, long COVID, the official...
Why do Bombas socks feel so good? Is it because we use the smartest design and best materials to make them the most comfortable socks ever?
Hold on.
That's part of...
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Where did I leave off?
People, you were explaining what long COVID was.
Yeah, so post-acute sequelae of COVID, or long COVID, is a post-COVID condition that can arise from your acute infection. So it's been about a year and a half since I've had it, and I've recovered or improved a little bit, but not overall. And while the majority of people that get long COVID get, loss of taste and smell, or other common symptoms, there's as one of my doctors that I've spoken to has put it, there's a wide array of symptoms that you can get from this disease, and many don't recover in 6 months. Many recover in a year or more. That's the thing, though. Because the virus is so new, not many people really know much about it. There's a few theories as to what causes long COVID. Some people say that there's such thing as viral persistence theory, where pockets of the virus remain in your body, like in your stomach or in your eyes, for large periods of time, which explains the symptoms. Some people think that it's microclotting in the bloodstream that cause inflammation. Some people think it's an abnormally long immune response resulting in a multi-system inflammatory syndrome. No one really knows. It could be multiple of these things. It could be all of these things, or it could be one of these things for each person. Overall, long COVID seems to be different for each person. And I've spoken to some long haulers, some that I know in person in my day-to-day life, some that I've met online in support groups. But overall,
have they
not being? Yeah.
Is there, and I know that there was just a study that came out just a couple of days ago, where they had come up with basically 4 different. I think they looked at about 200 people who had long COVID, and they found that the people who had long COVID had, at least one or two of these elements potentially in terms of predicting whether someone will get long COVID would be either the presence of auto antibodies, which, sort of like lupus, apparently, where your immune system attacks your own body. The second factor was the presence of Epstein-Barr virus that
the reactivation of it,
that may be reactivated in people. The third was, I think, the size of the viral load in the blood. And the final was if you had type 2 diabetes. Does your doctor have a sense that you had any of these sort of these conditions before you got COVID?
No. Before long COVID, I had no pre-existing conditions. I went to the gym and I ran pretty frequently.
So what kind of treatment do you get from the doctors? Are they just sort of like, I would imagine even the best of physicians at this point are just sort of like reading as much as they can and trying a bunch of different therapies because it is so new.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's really tricky because I'm lucky enough to have family and friends and doctors that, believe me and support me. So whenever I've gone to one of my doctors, to talk about my condition, basically the most they could do was offer me compassion and basically say, maybe try to give me a drug that's on the market, for my heart palpitations, a beta blocker to prevent, abnormal heart rhythms, that sort of thing. But they offered things to try to treat the symptoms, but not the condition. On the other hand, though, there are a lot of people that weren't as lucky as I am, and they were gaslit, to all hell. I've spoken to people that, that have doctors that essentially, they didn't say it's verbatim, but they essentially said, have you considered that you're faking this condition? And that's part of the reason why I wanted to raise awareness for long COVID, because the more and more it's talked about, the more it's normalized and the more it can be researched.
And this is going to end up being a significant problem, I think, from a healthcare perspective. We could have potentially, what would we 75 million have been, been infected with COVID.
The minister of Finland says long COVID could become it's the country's largest chronic disease.
I read about that.
Yeah. We'll see. If there really isn't a hard and fast. There's different studies that have shown anywhere from 5 to 20% of people get long COVID, and then long COVID can last anywhere from 3 to 6 to 9 to months to we'll find out how long. And if we're talking anywhere from 5 to even if you just assume 10% of 74 million people infected in this country, we're talking 7.5, maybe. Yeah. Ultimately, we're going to have 10, 12 million people who. It's a real problem, and I wish you the best of luck. Did you ultimately get vaccinated? At one point I remember reading, and I didn't see any studies on it, but I do remember reading that in some instances the vaccination helped, or monoclonal antibodies after the fact helped. Have you had, what's your been experience with that?
No, yeah. So I got double vaccinated pretty early on into my long haul. I also got my booster a month ago. It didn't really help for me. I know for some people it does, but that's why it helps some people and why it doesn't help some other people is pretty. It's not really known as to why. How much time do you think I have left to speak? Because there's a few more things I'd like to bring up.
Go ahead. You got a couple more minutes.
All right, cool. So when it comes to, you mentioned before that, Emma mentioned that in Finland, that the minister said.
Yeah, the health minister. I should have said. I meant to say. Yeah.
Well, overseas, it's being talked about much more than it is in America. In England, I'm not sure if this is still accurate, but I've read some reports from English news sources that around 1 million people in England altogether are long haulers, to different degrees, of course. Some people, have relatively minor symptoms. Some people are, completely bedbound and entirely disabled. I guess, I'd be about in between. But it's the range as to, how it can vary. When people say there's like millions of long haulers, that is true, but there are different types and it's of different severities. So that is one of the things I wanted to mention. And then the other thing is, suicide rates and mental health among long haulers. Over time, more and more long haulers have been committing suicide because they think there's no hope.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely, horrifying. A lot of people are getting desperate too. People are trying things that have no basis in science to try to get them better. I've tried some experimental treatment options. I've experimented with different medications that have been prescribed to me, as long as my doctor said it's safe. And some have helped a little, some haven't. But the point still stands that for some people it's going to take a long time to get better, and that without proper research on this virus, some people they're going to be with us for a long time, and possibly with long-lasting health effects for the rest of their life. So, I guess that's about it. When I saw your segments on the kids with long COVID, that broke my fucking heart, because I'm 19. I'm old enough to rationalize and understand what's going on with me. With a 5-year-old who has no clue what's happening to them. I don't know. It's horrible. So.
Well, let me ask you this, lastly, is there a site online? Are there Facebook groups? Where are their support groups that if anybody's listening, they have long COVID and they need some help? Where might people go based upon your experience?
Okay, oops, I dropped something. So there's one particular website that I find is, I'm not a part of it. I'm kind of doing a bit better in terms of mental health as of recently, so I've been I kind of left. But there's a group called Survivor Corps. It's survivorcorps.com, and they mainly talk about COVID survivors. That's their main, those are their constituents, and they talk about long COVID and all sorts of things relating to that. There's also I feel the need to bring this up. There is a subreddit called just r/COVID long haulers. Some people have good experiences. Some people have good experiences with it. I personally left it after a while. It is a support group, but there are a lot of people that sometimes speak really negatively, and it can get really depressing sometimes. Okay. So I'm not saying to avoid it, but I'm saying if you go on there, just be
aware.
Yeah.
Someone just IM'd that Ezra Klein had a good show on it called Long COVID and the Blind Spot of American Medicine on his podcast. And Matt just asked, too, if you've heard of the Long COVID Alliance.
I have, yeah.
Have you had any experience with it?
I haven't. Now that you bring up the Long COVID Alliance, there is one more thing I should bring up. Certain hospitals throughout the country have the long COVID clinics. The hospital group, Northwestern Medicine, they have one. As of now, what they do is essentially, if you join that group via your hospital, from my knowledge and from my experience, they just provide you with doctors from different professions, like a neurologist and a cardiologist, to try to help you with help you manage your symptoms. Obviously, they're not going to give you a cure, but they'll that way they can monitor your symptoms and get data on it too. So that is another thing.
All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate the call and the information, and you probably helped a bunch of people. So really, thanks very much for calling.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Yep. Hang in there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bless you, man, because I mean, there's a large coordinated campaign by libertarian think tanks ready to deny this stuff, and it's only going to get more and more pronounced. So we're going to need to be fighting this for a long time. So.
I mean, it's like a cold. It's like a cold we hear. I mean, and even since the beginning of this, the conservative media ecosystem has been trying to downplay, oh, it's like the flu or whatever. Long COVID is not even something that's come out of one conservative commentator's mouth. Not once. Not once. And this is going to be affecting millions and millions of people worldwide and in the U.S. for the next few years. And then it's going to be who could have seen this coming, or for the conservatives, it's just going to be, all right, fend for yourself.
Yeah, it's all in their head. That's what they're going to say.
All the talk about the mental health too aspects of the lockdown, like just bullshit. There's no real genuine concern about anybody's mental health.
COVID. IMs. On Thursday, the Samless crew agreed with elitist callers that belittled Jordan Peterson because his PhD is in psychology, mocked as not science, and because he went to a supposedly mediocre university. Peterson's PhD is from McGill, which is one of the top universities in the world.
I don't
Psych
care.
PhDs are trained in research methods, statistics, and often other natural sciences. Peterson's views are moronic despite his training and pedigree, not because of it. McGill is a very, very controversial university in my circles because, I have a couple of friends who went to McGill, and I desperately want my daughter to go to McGill because it is dramatically less expensive than U.S. things. And I also always wanted Canadian citizenship because if you're a Canadian citizen, it is much less expensive. But the funny thing is, and I haven't heard this, I've heard this sort of like as a bank shot. A Canadian I know who's like, who I think went to McGill, who's like, it's amazing how much people perceive McGill as like the Harvard of the North, and it's not. It's just like an average school, but it has this sort of allure. They did a great marketing campaign, but nevertheless.
As has Harvard, as has Yale, as has all these elite universities are all like propped up by reputation that is not necessarily earned.
Yeah, I mean, look, to go back to the call, I think it was a weak line of attack on Jordan Peterson that he went to X school, because I do think those school ratings are stupid, but yeah, I mean, I forgot what my point was.
It was within the context.
Jordan Peterson's an idiot and deserves to be mocked. And that's really at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah. What I said was, like, he can do his, Jungian metaphysics stuff if he, on the other hand, tolerates gender and race and Marxist studies down the hall. But the problem is Jordan Peterson's a quack, and he's saying that we should, like, have a wholesale destruction of all these things that he thinks are woke
and it was
against Western civilization.
It was within the context of the fact that the right wing likes to completely not take into account the overwhelming consensus of scientific experts and expertise, and they'll find these people who are alternative thinkers, but yet still have like the artificial credibility assigned to them of having a PhD or going to a certain type of university. And so, like, yeah, it's not the best line of attack if we're going after him, and it wouldn't be at the number one arrow out of my quiver, but we were using that as a device to talk about that kind of bullshit.
Josh from Tucson. Is that the softest collared shirt, Emma? Only boomers send their
super soft, yes.
Only boomers send their NFTs over snail mail. Anyone know if Danarchy is working on a new mix with some Emma in it?
Well, Sam does print out tweets to look at them, so sending an NFT in the mail is just the next step.
Yep, there we go. Henry, what are your thoughts on Neil Young pulling out of Spotify to protest Joe Rogan's anti-vax agenda? Do you think it'll make an impact? I mean, it seems like it's made enough of an impact that
Joni Mitchell
Spotify,
did it too, yeah.
Joni Mitchell, I think Nils Lofgren's going to. I mean, look, the bottom line is there's a couple of things that are true. Spotify makes a lot more money off of Joe Rogan than they ever will off of the vast majority of their musicians. And I've read it even cost them money to have Neil Young on. Sometimes there's a lost leader. I don't know about that, but clearly it cost them in market capitalization because apparently their stock went down quite a bit. And I think they're worried that it could catch on and it would be problematic. But ultimately, they make a ton of money out of Joe Rogan. My understanding is that you cannot get on Joe Rogan's show as an advertiser unless you spend $1 million. Now, it's not $1 million to get your ad on Rogan alone. I don't know the numbers associated with this other than I've read about $1 million. But what it is, it's one of these things where it's like, for $1 million, and this is the minimum, you'll get, and I'm making up these numbers, but just to express the dynamic, you'll get 5 ads on Joe Rogan, and then we will do 30 other ads across our platform, and they'll go into shows of this ilk with a similar demo, and you'll get 5 ads on each of those shows or whatever. And the idea, I think, has to do on some level with their move to what is known as dynamic insertion, which is essentially like they put the ads in afterwards in the back catalog that they have, so that the ads could show up on a show that was actually released a year ago, but when they replay it, you go back in. So there's a lot of money associated with Rogan. So I don't know if it'll make a difference. But here's the thing that's sort of very frustrating. Okay, Rogan put out an Instagram, and I don't know, who knows if this is just a sort of like a certain amount of ego associated with this and just ignorance. And Rogan wants to come on like, people don't understand my show. This is what I do. But I don't care. I don't care that your show is really about your exploration for X, Y, or Z.
Yes, this is not like modern art that he's participating in. He's delving into science and pandemic commentary. So,
and look, this is what's amazing about this is play the first couple of minutes of this Instagram thing. This is what, like, even when he's ostensibly not presenting anything, he is presenting something. And does that mean that I should think that he should be banned? I think he should be criticized. And I certainly, let me put it this way. Yeah. I certainly wouldn't if I had a network, I certainly wouldn't put him on because I don't want to be associated with that. Because I don't want to be in a position where I'm pumping out stuff that I know could have a negative impact on the society's health.
It could kill people, and it probably has. And so, like,
kudos to Neil Young. And if I thought that, I don't know, Spotify can do whatever they want. And people can also do whatever they want and treat Spotify in the way that they want to. Like, this is, this whole notion, like, this is censorship. No, this is commercial business.
It's a private company that is making a choice.
There's a million. Well, I don't know if there's literally 1 million places, mechanisms for Joe Rogan to put his stuff out.
If he decided to go independent tomorrow, he would have make a ton of money regardless.
Well, he was, exactly.
Or if he had to be independent.
He just wanted the big bucks, and Spotify wanted an anchor, and this is all just a business dealings. And boo-hoo if your business didn't work out in the way that you wanted.
Yeah, and my problem is, so I don't care I don't have a position one way or the other. What Spotify does, I'm not in the room to make that decision. But what I have a problem with is the free speech people who are coming on and say don't censor Joe Rogan, lying about what Joe Rogan actually is. Edward Snowden, who coming tweeting out because I guess the bat signal went up to come defend Joe Rogan. Snowden saying nobody relies on this guy for medical information. He has people coming on that call themselves doctors and professors. Those people are trusted. So at least be honest. If you think that like that sort of charlatanry should be open to people. Admit what it is, and then say you support that. Don't lie about what he's doing.
Literally, Aaron Rodgers is coming on saying that that he goes to Joe Rogan for scientific information. There, yeah, okay.
Nobody goes to Edward Snowden for media critique, except for the 214,000 people who liked his tweet. I mean, give me a break. That's not the society we live in anymore. Okay.
What do people go to Joe Rogan for then, dude?
They don't go to Joe Rogan for anything other than entertainment. But then they get medical device that ends up information that informs their opinion about these things. Of course they do. That's just completely disingenuous. So here is Rogan doing his Instagram, where he's basically, supposedly, being, I wouldn't say apologetic, but saying
he had a stern call with the executives at Spotify, and they said that they need to you at least needs to couch this to take some heat off, and then he's never going to change.
Of course. But even in the first 3 minutes of the Instagram, he delivers more misinformation. It is very subtle, but what it does is it basically is creating the modus operandi in which you can distrust the public health policy that is being presented by experts. Watch.
Hello, friends. I wanted to make a video to address some of the controversy that's been going on over the past few days. And first of all, to say thank you to everyone that sent love and support. I truly, truly appreciate it. And it's been very nice to hear from you. I wanted to make this video, first of all, because I think there's a lot of people that have a distorted perception of what I do, maybe based on sound bites or based on headlines of articles that are disparaging. The podcast has been accused of spreading dangerous misinformation, specifically about 2 episodes, a little bit about some other ones, but specifically about 2. One with Dr. Peter McCullough and one with Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Peter McCullough is a cardiologist, and he is the most published physician in his field in history. Dr. Robert Malone owns 9 patents on the creation of mRNA vaccine technology and is at least partially responsible for the creation of the technology that led to mRNA vaccines. Both these people are very highly credentialed, very intelligent, very accomplished people, and they have an opinion that's different from the mainstream narrative. I wanted to hear what their opinion is. I had them on, and because of that, those episodes in particular, those episodes were labeled as being dangerous. They had dangerous misinformation in them. The problem I have with the term misinformation, especially today, is that many of the things that we thought of as misinformation just a short while ago are now accepted as fact. Like, for instance, 8 months ago, if you said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. They would ban you from certain platforms.
Pause it. Now, first off, so let's be clear what he's doing here. He's now redefining misinformation and saying that the word misinformation doesn't really mean anything, because 8 months ago, if you had said the vaccine, you can still get COVID with the vaccine, you would get bumped from social media. Now, first off,
that's not true.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
That's just a lie. Period. End of story. You would not. We were just talking about it. Some of the Yankees got COVID.
We were unsure of what the facts were going to be.
But then it was apparent that, yes, breakthrough infection is a thing, and everyone is just like, yes, that's a thing.
And then we adjusted.
But it still helps you. It still lowers the infection, and it still protects you from
to the extent
disease.
That anybody got bumped from social media. It wasn't because they said there are such a thing as breakthrough infections. It was because they were saying that the vaccine is ineffective in stopping COVID. And the fact of the matter is 2 things. One, it is still effective. It is not as effective as it was 8 months ago because COVID is a different virus than it was 8 months ago, at least in terms of the ones that we're subjected to. In fact, we're 2 iterations away from when we first got the vaccine. It was far more effective then than it is now. It is still effective, okay? I can go out completely. I can wear a windbreaker out when it's 32 degrees. It's going to be better than going out with nothing on at all.
And he's also conflating the infection rates with Delta when the vaccines were a bit more effective.
That's
than
what I'm saying. Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes. And so he's lying about the fact that people got bounced for saying there were breakthrough infections, and B, also ignoring the fact that 8 months ago, the efficacy of the vaccine was very different than it is today. It's not that people have changed their minds. It's that COVID
virus
literally changed.
Yes.
All right, but continue. And remember, he's all talking about this in service of undercutting the concept of misinformation. In other words, misinformation doesn't exist. So how could I be accused of providing misinformation? Go ahead.
8 months ago, if you said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. They would ban you from certain platforms. Okay. Now, that's accepted as fact. If you said, I don't think cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that...
Well, let's just take this fact. Cloth masks work better than no masks. And I can assure you, you can listen to this program when Osterholm, who he cites later in this, came onto the program and said, the fact is that an N95 is going to give you a lot more time in a room with other people, whether they're wearing an N95 or not. That also fits into the equation. But masks, cloth mask will help you. It is better than nothing. If somebody has COVID in the room, you want them all wearing cloth masks, and you wear a cloth mask in that room, you've got more time in there than if nobody's masked. That's simply the fact. And it was the fact then, too. What people got, and I don't know if anybody got bounced, was to pretend that masks were child abuse. Child abuse is what we were told by Tucker Carlson that they were. People were being attacked for wearing masks.
They were attacking.
They were
school
told it's
board
completely
meetings
useless
because there was an advocate who was trying to speak to parents at school board meetings saying masks should be worn in schools.
Again, here he is trying to argue that misinformation does not exist, at least in this realm, because here are some examples that are in themselves false. Continue.
Cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that COVID-19 came from a lab, you'd be banned from many social media platforms. Now, that's on the cover of Newsweek. All of those theories that at one point in time were banned were openly discussed by those 2 men that I had on my podcast that have been accused of dangerous misinformation.
That theory wasn't banned. The president of the United States was saying.
Exactly.
You're just fucking joking.
Does he mention ivermectin and how one of his guests said it was a near perfect prophylactic, or is that one of the?
That one did not come up. That did not come up. That did not come up. The ivermectin thing did not come up.
You know how when someone's a liar, they conflate evolving and changing information with something like misinformation, and they set a standard.
Now,
they set a standard of absolute 100% foolproof facts that is impossible for the kind of situation that we're in, which is a global pandemic, to reach. It's impossible. And then that's how they discredit everybody else.
Now,
and they make their alternative fake information, fake news, false information more appealing in that way.
Now, here's the thing that's also sort of brilliant about this whole sort of free speech campaign. We're now going to be accused of trying to censor this guy who has a reach that is 50 times ours, more than 50 times.
Which we're not saying, yeah.
This is not censorship. To say someone is full of shit is not censorship. And for someone who has a platform, if Spotify wants to be known as the platform for people who are full of shit, then that's on them. There should be no inhibition on our ability to call this out and to say that Spotify has to be responsible for what they're putting out. And if that's what they want to do, that's what they'll do. But this whole thing of like, it's free speech and liberals don't want to be like,
and it's just jokes, and it's just jokes, and he's just a comedian, all that stuff. It's all bullshit. Be honest about what he's doing and then say you think that should be allowed because of free speech.
And if this wasn't about cash, you can be assured that Spotify would boot this guy immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately.
If Spotify doesn't recoup its investment on Joe Rogan, then free speech is dead.
And here's the thing. What wouldn't you allow on Spotify? Let's just play this game, too. Would you allow for, I don't know, open, not open advocacy of pedophilia? Not illegal. The advocacy of pedophilia in and of itself is not illegal. Would you allow for that? Would Spotify allow for that? Why not? Would Spotify allow for, I don't know, a whole host of stuff? Would they allow neo-Nazis to have a show where they just talk about outwardly, as opposed to sort of like couching it in some type of like, I have a PhD, so I'm discussing this.
Check out these demographics.
Would they allow someone like, I don't know, Bill Maher saying that the terrorists who committed 9/11 are brave, right? Remember,
but
the point is that person got canceled, and this person.
Well, no, but what I'm suggesting here is that there's obviously a limit. That everyone listening to these words has a limit. So it's not a question of whether it's free speech or not to be platformed by Spotify. It is a determination as to what crosses the line.
Substack or Spotify, neither of them allow nudity.
Yeah, now why is that? Why is that? It is because there are lines that they create and that they determine are okay. So censorship is okay with Spotify, with Substack, with all of them. It's just a question of where we draw the line. Some people say it should be at nudity. Other people say it's when you're basically telling lies about a pandemic that could get people killed. It's arbitrary either way. I would much rather have people see someone's buttocks on a Spotify show or on a YouTube show than to be basically told, yeah, you know what? You don't need to be vaccinated. You don't need to wear masks in this instance.
Yeah. Let's maybe associate free speech with things people like to look at as opposed to quacks and crypto racists.
Well, does he continue here? Because I want to.
Well, he goes on for like 8 or 9 minutes, but I don't know that there's really not really. I mean, that was the rest of it is like, well, he'll do a better job of bringing on guests and booking. Like, I appreciate this. Like, the guy's, he's in over his head, and he's incapable of assessing that. And it's a business model now that he doesn't. That's basically what he goes on to say. I'm just a guy. I'm doing a show. I'm just booking my show. That's all well and good. But there are millions of people who watch you, and you're delving into areas that you do not understand, and you're trying to be some type of iconoclast when it comes to medicine.
Talk DMT, bro. Talk mushrooms. Let's, come on.
It's just real. I mean, it's really, and even in his so-called explanation, he is trying to undercut the concept of misinformation.
After bolstering the credibility of the two quacks that he's been using to inform himself.
Right. The guy who says that he invented mRNA, and then the actual creators of this vaccine.
He holds patents.
Have a bit. He holds 9 patents. I'm pretty sure Bill Gates has a lot of patents, doesn't he?
It's funny, though. A lot of people have credited Malone with being the, quote, inventor of mRNA before, even like Rogan does in this video, qualifying that in a different way, saying he contributed a lot and has some patents. Right. So even they know he's bullshitting, but they want to cover for him.
Right. All right, let's... It really is infuriating. It is infuriating, and the sort of like the high-minded, like, this is about censorship and whatnot. Give me an effing break. Honestly, give me a break. Spotify should just wear it. Just this is what we do. Yeah.
There's an audience for it, and we're here to serve that audience. Fine.
This is good. This is pretty remarkable because this is a clip from Fox Outnumbered, and it is very rare that we play a clip that involves Dave Rubin where he does not have the stupidest thing to say.
That's so
in the clip.
That's so odd.
Now, to be fair to Dave Rubin, he doesn't speak in this clip, so he doesn't say the stupidest thing that's said in this clip. So we still reserve the right in the future to play stupid clips of Dave Rubin, but in this instance, it is actually Julie Banderas, who is taking aim at the bipartisan infrastructure bill and apparently has no sense of what has been the major legislative fight over the past 6 months in this country.
Fairy tales. I love fairy tales. I mean, but normally I only enjoy them when it's during a bedtime story in the evening, not on a daily basis for the past year since the White House has been overrun by Democrats. But President Biden has been making promises over promises over promises, and as you've noticed, none of them have come true. And when a president makes...
I didn't catch this, but the White House has been overrun by Democrats. In other words, the Democrats won the election and walked in. It's almost as if like we need to change the definition of overrun, right? Like, how do we, I mean, honestly, this is like a sort of, the White House was overrun. It was almost like it was an insurrection.
I was about to say, right? What happened on January 6th?
All right, go back and play it from the beginning. This is when Biden was showing up in Pittsburgh. A bridge outside of Pittsburgh collapsed, and he was there to tout the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Fairy tales. I love fairy tales. I mean, but normally I only enjoy them when it's during a bedtime story in the evening, not on a daily basis for the past year since the White House has been overrun by Democrats. But President Biden has been making promises over promises over promises, and as you've noticed, none of them have come true. And when a president makes promises and then doesn't deliver, and then something like this where a bus, I mean, there could have been multiple casualties. So thank God nobody was killed. But honestly, a bridge collapsing right before back in June of 2021, he started talking about his bipartisan infrastructure deal. There's something bipartisan about it. If it was bipartisan, it would have been passed by now. So clearly he's not getting the message across to the other side of the aisle, which, by the way, if you remember, during his campaign, he said that he was going to be the president that was going to reach across the aisle, that he was actually going to make policy by reaching out to Republicans. That clearly has not happened.
Yeah, now
everyone starts nodding.
They're all just sort of like, are we supposed to pretend like it didn't happen? Wait, I didn't get the memo for this segment because, of course, and I'm not, and I would say I am not terribly happy about it, but the bipartisan infrastructure bill did in fact pass months ago. Probably closer to June, whenever she quoted him. Probably closer to June than it is today. When was it? Like in September, did it pass?
Stop it with these fairy tales. She only likes them in specific times in her life, just not all the time. And you're just, you won't shut up about it.
Well, once upon a time, almost half of the Republican caucus in the Senate voted to pass this bipartisan infrastructure bill. I think it was 19, including the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate.
That might make it bipartisan.
There was another, I think it was November 15th. All right, so fair enough. And from June, I guess it was what? It doesn't matter. It was months and months ago. They had no clue about it. She just gets on there and opines about this stuff with absolutely no clue.
Maybe it's like a 51st date situation where she had some sort of traumatic brain injury and she's waking up and she thinks that it's November 14th every day. Bipartisan infrastructure hasn't passed.
It's like Groundhog Day.
Well, everyone around her keeps giving her a paper saying this is the news of the day. She can't remember.
The other thing that people should take away from this clip is that whatever motivated the White House into splitting up this bill so that their signature piece of legislation was going to fail, and they thought they were going to get all sorts of plaudits and momentum from passing the bipartisan bill. Guess what? Your entire sense of American politics is completely divorced from reality. It took about 30 seconds for people to forget that you had passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Nobody cared. Everybody wanted the material benefits that were coming in the Build Back Better bill. That's what you campaigned on. Bipartisan achievement gets you nothing in politics today. I'm not even sure, frankly, that providing material benefits for the American public gets one as much as it should. But the idea that it's bipartisan is going to get you anywhere is just... that may have floated 30 years ago. I don't think so. Bill Clinton was impeached right after they passed the bipartisan welfare bill. But it certainly doesn't work today. So I hope it's a lesson for the Biden administration. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
He'll still get blamed for that bridge.
Indeed.
Collapse, yeah.
Between the 101 and the 5, did you guys see a tweet from a healthcare worker saying that basic but necessary healthcare supplies are so critically low around the country, we effectively have a non-functioning healthcare system? They say the long-term crisis from COVID over 2 years now is finally catching up. I keep reading stuff about that in terms of like both from a staffing and from a healthcare supplies. I don't know. Sam's beautiful shit-lib beard. Brady is waiting to officially announce his retirement from the NFL so he can announce he's going to be Trump's running mate for 2024. District Jabroni, did Stephanopoulos not bring up what happened after Scalia died? How can anyone sit there and claim the court is not a political institution is beyond me? I know, it's absurd. Valley Girl, HR question. My kid has a reoccurring doctor's appointment, so I leave every Thursday by 2 hours. My time card, I always ask for leave without pay. LWOP. The HR lady has stated that I know I have sick time. Have to take sick time. I'm in California and I don't know where to turn. Can I please get some help? I would contact the New York State Department of Labor.
California?
The California State Department of Labor or the California Attorney General's office, and they may have a labor section. I would just call them. Sam soft-collared shtick. Speaking of NFTs and Beanie Babies, I have to recommend HBO's Beanie Baby documentary and YouTuber folding ideas.
I heard that was great.
Epic video on crypto and NFTs titled Line Goes Up.
Maybe I'll watch that tonight.
Ray, do you guys see a correlation between that Jackson Hinkle said about the Squad, that they are sellouts now, to what you guys discussed with Jason Miles about punk rock fandom? Meaning once a band or politician became a little more mainstream, that it's time to dump them and find someone more edgy?
Yeah, well, maybe.
I don't think so, because I really think that, like, there is no consistency to what Hinkle was saying. Hinkle was saying
It may not be him though. It's the impulse of people that like Jim or kind of liked Jimmy and were eager to turn on the Squad. It's like a bit of a nihilism too.
I think it's a bit of a nihilism. I think it's a desire for a third party and an understanding that the third party movement in this country is completely anemic. And then I think part of it is just like this is a way to create some type of distinct brand within a certain sector of YouTube. I mean, that dude is about branding more than anything else. But you can't reasonably say, I think fascism is coming from the squad, and then say, but we shouldn't primary them? What? That seems weird. Talia from Tampa. When Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed, it was because Ronald Reagan promised to appoint a woman. When Thurgood Marshall retired, HW appointed Clarence Thomas. When RBG died, Trump appointed a woman. Republicans have been doing the same. Well, of course. Of course. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Conservatives only support two forms of affirmative action: legacy emissions and the Electoral College. Not only did Gorsuch and Kavanaugh just happen to be the same white guys, end up at the same on the bench, they went to the same effing high school. Most qualified candidates, my ass. If a black woman didn't have to work twice as hard as the people around her to achieve the same level of success, I despise this bullshit. In the same vein, I'm extra happy Cincinnati made the Super Bowl because now I won't have to have some creepy, corny Jackson Mahomes TikTok in 2 weeks.
People are very happy about that, yeah. Screw that kid.
Fierce Deity, very disappointed to hear Sam open an ad with the new year and not have it followed up by new rear. Sam's luscious beard. Hey, Sam, kind of on the same topic as today's guest, Robert Evans of Behind the Bastards and It Could Happen Here podcast would be a cool guest to have on. He focused a lot on the far right rising.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, we've heard that before, I think. Yeah, we should get him on a list. Token Funger. Sam, you still haven't booked AOC to come on the show. Clearly, this is proof you're refusing to hold her to account for not forcing all the votes. Noog Wrangler. There's a Twitter account impersonating David Dang, following and DMing randomly. Its handle is the same as Dan's, except with an underscore at the end. Well, let Dayan know. I mean, they should get, I don't know. That's weird. World-class illustrator. Jonathan Katz is a lot less funny than I remember. Teacher Dan, who is the young fellow you were debating regarding your weak defense of Democratic Party establishment critique of hold the vote type strategy? That shit was way more useful and substantive than listening to you take some libertarian clown down. At some point, you should contend with the misguided Democrats are just inept line.
Oh, is this the same person who writes in, says they're failing on purpose? Stupid. It's dumb. I'm sorry. Reevaluate your take. Please.
I just... What's step 2 here?
Oh, everyone starts voting for the Green Party or the People's Party.
I just don't understand what step 2 is here.
Oh, we just shut down the show. We don't care about politics anymore, and we move on with our lives.
Well, I mean, honestly, there must be a step 2. If you believe that Joe Biden, this has all been a kabuki theater, where Joe Biden never wanted to pass anything except for the infrastructure bill, and went through this entire process and continues to pretend, like, even in light of the fact that we see polling that says 36% of people want Joe Biden to continue to work on Build Back Better and 60% want him to work on inflation. Even in light of that, to fool this program, which is, and to fool just some sector of the Democratic activist base into thinking that they want to pass some of this stuff. They're doing this. If that's the case, that it's really just a ruse, what do you suggest?
Well, they suggest that we force the vote on Medicare for all so we know which Democrats to primary in 2022.
Like, it's just absurd.
Right? I mean, that entire strategy was about creating a better Democratic Party. Like, I would suggest paying more attention to independent socialist candidates like Robin Warloba in Minnesota, but they don't give a fuck about that stuff either.
It's just bizarre to me. Amazonian. I mean, this is really just about people who just want to be acknowledged as if they have found some secret truth.
Yep. That's also what motivates people that listen to, like, Rogan and things like that. There's a narcissism in being able to go against mainstream narrative, feel like you've accessed something that makes you different from other people, and that you're going against the grain of society in a heroic way. It's the exact same impetus as to why people join cults. Join cults, or or became enamored with what's his face? I can't remember his name now. Who?
Alex Jones.
Oh.
Amzunion. Sam, we're big fans of your podcast. Can you please interview Christian Smalls, head of our Amazon labor union? He has amazing firsthand experience and information on...
We had him on TMBS.
Oh, let's do. Is he...
He's the guy that originally, when the Amazon stuff started going on...
Staten Island?
Yes. And the White House was... or was it... No, it was Amazon itself saying, we want this guy to be the head of it because we think we can demonize him. But he's like held up really well.
Yeah, let's get him.
So he was the initial guy fired by Amazon in retaliation for attempting to unionize on Staten Island. That's the guy I'm thinking of? Okay, cool. I remember that.
Chantel, thank you, Sam, for owning up to your lack of understanding about how bad inflation can get a couple of months back. It shows your ability to learn from mistakes. Now, with that said, we're going to have David Dayan on tomorrow to talk about some of the supply chain. And I have a report here that is that makes the argument that which is not to say that the observed increase in prices is not impacting people, but that this is not inflation as we generally consider it, which means that it's very likely it will not behave like inflation does. Where is this? I didn't have a chance to get too deep into it. But there is a paper out Vox EU apparently did a write-up of this paper. Well, we'll get into it more. But yes, I am surprised that prices have remained high on some of these goods for as long as it has. I still contend that we are not dealing with what is typical inflation, as it were. Jen Hexer, my son is lucky. I don't know about Smedley Butler before he was born, or it's very possible he would be the only Zoomer named Smedley on the planet. Homeless. Last week, Emma said she had no idea about Kasparian's take on homelessness. Basically, she said that drug addiction is one of the biggest reasons behind homelessness, and housing for all will not solve it. She also blamed fellow progressives for their lack of understanding of the issue.
I'm not going to comment on it. I'll watch it and then maybe I'll comment on it. But I mean, she's my friend. I don't want to like do anything to critique her that publicly. She's got a good heart. Orgel
Begelstein. It's sad. Marines are still taught about Smedley Butler in boot camp, but it only talks about his wartime accomplishments without ever mentioning his anti-war and anti-imperialist stance later on. And of course, in Marine boot camp, there's no mention of Marines committing genocide. I think it would be good more lesson to teach young Marines. I don't know. It sounded like that there was some understanding of some of Smedley Butler later, but I don't know. Random info. I believe Dwight Eisenhower was also involved in the suppression of the World War I bonus March occupation. Left-handed stranger.
Sorry, I just had one thing to note on the Sullivan and Cromwell law firm that was mentioned. A little fellow by the name of Peter Thiel also did a spell at Sullivan and Cromwell working as a securities trader before he decided he needed to be a right-wing.
Is that right?
Yep. So. Long lineage there. Also, Nixon, I think, maybe worked for Brown Brothers or Sullivan, or he worked for one of those law firms, too.
Now, there was a certain inevitability to this. In fact, so inevitable after watching Steven Crowder. At one point, this program, Ken show, did this segment where the host of the Ken show, this guy named The Deuce, went to an elementary school to challenge. I wish we had that clip of an elementary school kid to debate with them. Ben Shapiro doesn't really allow for any debate here with these kids, but Ben Shapiro went to Where was this? At I guess it was at a library. And it's with an organization called Conserva Kids.
Yeah, I was concerned about this because it seems like child abuse just on the face of it, but it looks like all the parents were Shapiro fans and they signed their kids up.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So
it is child abuse.
Yeah, but it's, voluntary child abuse.
But I also, what is amazing to me, does Ben Shapiro have kids?
I don't know.
Yes. He does? Because it is rare to see someone who has kids talk to kids like this. Like it's like watching Donald Trump talk to kids.
It's weird.
I mean, it is almost like the first time that Ben Shapiro has ever spoken to kids. But here it is, Ben Shapiro explaining to kids how government works and that, of course, taxation is theft.
It's called cannibalism.
My mom and dad told me I was gonna meet Ben Shapiro.
And did you know who he was?
Nope.
Government. Okay, so who has an idea about government? Go for it.
I don't.
Government is what takes all of your money and gives you very little in return.
That is not true.
Okay, that's it's kind of true. It depends on the kind of government.
That's what taxes are for.
Yeah, that is what taxes are for, but taxes are theft, children. The reality is that government is necessary so that people don't hurt each other, so that people don't murder each other. Right, so people don't eat people. That's right.
Yes.
You do need a government to prevent people from eating people. The Constitution. Who knows something about the Constitution? Anybody heard of the Constitution? Anybody heard of the Constitution?
Never heard of it.
Okay, so the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution is the document that lays out the list of rules for what the government.
I love the fact that they put Mr. Shapiro. I want you kids who are coming to this to refer to me as Mr. Shapiro, please.
Show me that respect.
Yes. I wonder
what it can do and what the government cannot do. So the Declaration of Independence is 1776. So right as we're founding the country, right as the founding fathers are founding the country in the Revolutionary War, we fought a war against Great Britain in 1776.
Okay, maybe you do know a lot.
What was that?
And talk okay, maybe you do know a lot. And talk fast.
Yeah, I do talk fast. But you guys can keep up. You're young.
I do run pretty fast.
I'm sure you do.
I run very fast.
Let me tell you.
Did who released this video? Is this supposed
They did. The Daily Wire folks.
Yeah, this is like a.
I just don't understand how they're like, this looks great. Look at how Ben is completely not connecting with these kids and just like pouring propaganda.
What are you talking about? One of them called me smart. What are you talking about?
Can we get the drag queens back in here to read some children's stories?
It's just unbelievable. Keep going, because this is just sort of. This is stunning.
They're like 6 years late to that viral phenomenon about when kids reacting to X. Right. But that happened like 10 years ago.
But I wonder if this isn't like more about fundraising, because this doesn't feel to me like they're putting this out. Like, what are we supposed to glean from this?
That he's undoing CRT in these children's brains.
I feel like they're raising money for some type of initiative, like to show like this is what it's going to look like. It didn't necessarily work out exactly, but we're going to get more pliant kids. Go ahead.
Have to pay for your houses.
Well, yeah, there is.
And air conditioning and solar.
Right, you have to pay taxes on like everything.
Yeah,
like
watches,
everything.
electricity.
Not on your income in Florida, because Florida's amazing. Right, so taxes are, the government takes a part of the money that you spend, or the money that you earn, or the property value of your house.
On useless stuff. What about debt?
Mostly, yes. I mean, they're supposed to spend it on things like the police. They're not supposed to spend it on just random projects or silly things that they have in their head, and they tend to spend it on kind of silly things very often. But as you get older, you will realize how little you like taxes. Taxes are very, very annoying.
I already think they're terrible.
Alrighty, let's see what else.
Yeah.
Quantitative easing.
What?
Wow, who put this one in here?
What is that?
All right, are we really gonna do this? We could do this. Okay,
No.
so yeah, I know. I'm with you.
Laughing.
The reason that they're laughing is because this is super duper complicated. You know what a dollar is, right? Y'all used dollars before. How about Monopoly money? Have you guys ever played Monopoly? Right? Okay.
My mom and dad in it.
If you guys went to the store with Monopoly money, could you buy anything?
No.
No, you couldn't. Why not?
Because it's fake.
Because it's not real money. There is an agency of the federal government. It's called the Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve controls how many dollars are out there. If they just print a bunch of dollars and then they just give you those dollars, it turns out they didn't make you rich. All that happened is that your dollar now doesn't buy as many things. If the Federal Reserve just made...
I cannot believe they're still, I mean, aside from like the weird creepiness of all of this, there was QE 1, 2, and 3. back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, in that time period. And we were told time and time again, many times by Glenn Beck, that we are just moments away from Weimar Germany, where else were they saying that we were going to turn into?
Venezuela.
Venezuela, I think it was. Massive, massive inflation. The dollar's going to be worth nothing. It's going to be monopoly money. 10 years later, still not a problem. I mean, of course, we've had a pandemic and a lot of stuff is shut down, and there's some products that are more expensive, but that is not a function of quantitative easing. It turns out that when the Fed prints money, it's money. In fact, that's what all our money is. The Fed doesn't print it, obviously. It's the U.S. government does. But when they do quantitative easing, they're creating money. Fiat money, when it's American dollars, it turns out to be American dollars, not monopoly money. This blows the mind of people who feel that it's not real money unless you have a computer that generates it through an algorithm. So bizarre. I don't know if we need to really watch any more of that, do we?
He does say, is this where he says Schumer is one of his favorite politicians? Or did we?
No, he says this about Manchin, I think.
Oh, Manchin, right.
Yeah.
It's good to just note that.
It's just amazing. Like, let's put out that video. Do we have that video that makes me look like I've never spoken to a child in my entire life before? Do I come off as completely disconnected from the children enough that it's funny? No? Good. Let's run with that.
It'll be funny because of how dishonest it seems I'm speaking to the children.
It's like a fish out of water comedy.
It really is impressive. Like, can we put out something that is both showing me not connecting with children, but also not in a funny way?
But they put little boop-de-boop music in the back, so.
All right, lastly,
it's cute.
Donald Trump at a Texas rally. This was Saturday night. Basically, suggesting, I mean, this is more of, if you beat him up, I will cover your lawsuit type of thing. Here he is, claiming he will pardon people from January 6th. And I have to say, if you are a Democratic strategist, you're pretty happy about this. Because this is what you want. You want Donald Trump to turn the Republican Party into just specifically cheerleaders for January 6th. That's specific.
And another thing we'll do, and so many people have been asking me about it, if I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons because they are being treated so unfairly. This hasn't happened to all of the other atrocities that took place recently. Nothing like this has happened. What that
the other atrocities, I guess, were what? Like, what other atrocities are you talking about? Protests?
Right. Black Lives Matter protests, Antifa.
The Antifa atrocities.
The great Antifa atrocity of
2020.
2020. Don't you all remember? He also told Hannity asked him straight up if he was going to run. Did you see that? So this was, I think, at this rally. He said, first of all, it's a long time. The odds. What are the odds? I'm looking very seriously, beyond seriously. From a legal standpoint, I don't really want to talk about it yet. So, like, I mean, when he's standing up there and saying, I'll pardon the January 6ers, I mean, it's pretty clear.
In the event that he runs, he will pardon them. I honestly, I think their failure to achieve any type of real legislative accomplishments, it's conceivable there'll be a couple of things that will pass. And some of those might be actually quite good. A universal pre-K, childcare provisions, maybe if they manage to extend or pass more of the child tax credit, there's a couple of things are hugely important to maintain like some activist support. But at least in terms of Joe Biden, in terms of 2024, running against Donald Trump is going to be a big part of it. And running against the Republican Party as being sort of accomplices in January 6th and everything that suggests in terms of their support for Donald Trump is going to be big. And so to see Donald Trump go out there and start talking this way, very helpful to the Democrats. Whether that's going to work or not, I don't know. Yeah. But it's certainly consistent with what they want.
You can't rule him out ever, in my opinion. But like when Hillary Clinton in the WikiLeaks emails was talking about the Pied Piper strategy or her team was, right? That's way more applicable now that all of the baggage is associated with him as a leader than it was in 2016 when he was, I'm going to, throw a brick through the window of the system as a candidate.
But also the problem with the Pied Piper strategy was that, I mean, on top of the other half a dozen things that Clinton did wrong, they never tied the Republican Party to Donald Trump. They never did. They let McConnell, they let Ryan exist as if they were completely separate entities.
Yeah, we're going to partner with Paul Ryan once they're
there's that quote, I think it's by Schumer. I've got Ryan, I've got Schumer, I've got Clinton. This is in October, I think, of 2020. We're going to pass the
2016. You mean
2016? We're going to repatriate the tax funds. We're going to build infrastructure. I mean, they never did that strategy. Among the other huge mistakes that they made in that campaign.
Running an insanely unpopular politician.
Yeah, but I mean, look, the bottom line is, had Hillary Clinton run a better, she was a flawed candidate from the beginning. But when you lose by that amount, there's like a half a dozen strategic, even tactical things they could have done differently to win.
Go to Michigan.
Go to Michigan. Go to Wisconsin. Don't focus so much on protecting Paul Ryan by trying to maintain that suburban vote.
Have Tim Kaine on the VP ticket?
Don't have Tim Kaine on the VP ticket. I mean,
Tim Kaine is not in my membrane.
It is. It goes on and on. On and on. They really, really were protecting Paul Ryan because of just Chuck Schumer, really said it. They were already trying to fashion the electorate in such a way that they would get the ability to negotiate with Paul Ryan. All right, time for one more call. Sorry, folks, for everybody who was hung on. Calling from an 813 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Brad from Sarasota.
Brad from Sarasota, you are the final caller of the day.
I appreciate it. Long time, first time. Emma, I've watched you since been on TYT. Thank you. Did a great job with the move over. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But really what I want to talk about was something that came up on Friday with this guy being super disingenuous about the Green New Deal. So, in general, it's just the first bill.
Wait. Let me catch up. Let me catch up for people who didn't listen on Friday.
Okay, yeah.
I had a caller call in, and I've gotten an email about it, but I have to dig into it because it's rather complicated. Caller came in and said, it is impossible under the Green New Deal to produce the type of energy that we need to sustain modern life because we need to create ammonia, we need to create steel, we need to create cement, and we cannot sustain life based upon the parameters of the Green New Deal. And my response was, I'm not in a position to make this assessment, but the problem with climate change is not that the Green New Deal does not provide the type of energy we need to sustain life, but rather we have a political problem that must be addressed. And that is far more of an issue at the moment than the insufficiency of the Green New Deal to produce the type of energy that we need. But go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, this is the first step bill to put anything forward so we can actually get our mindset on a new transition from the powers that we're taking from at the moment, which is obviously destroying our planet, to something that will be renewable and will be accessible. You're looking at an infrastructure that has nothing available at the moment from a renewable standpoint that can obviously be put into place. But that's exactly what the point of these bills are, is to actually build this infrastructure so we can actually be able to produce this type of aspect moving forward into the future. I mean, just in general, like he talks about concrete. Well, you can get rid of concrete pretty much immediately if you start working on, for example, hempcrete. Just hemp fiber and limestone, where you can source it in America. You don't have to go anywhere else. You can grow the product here. And also, especially in the Midwest, a big boon for more jobs in America itself to build this hempcrete that's not only stronger, it's lighter, and it's water resistant. There's bills right now that are going on in Florida that they've been talking about putting hempcrete walls up as seawalls to help protect us from climate change, because obviously they don't care about anything else other than just, masking the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, yes, I mean, that's the point is that it's quite possible that there are engineering solutions to the issues this guy brings up. And it's also possible that there aren't in some instances. But the bottom line is, we are dealing with a political problem at the moment when it comes to climate change. That is the biggest obstacle that we have at the moment, is to get society to understand that we need to address it. And it may involve deindustrialization in many respects. It may involve new products and new methodologies of which producing this stuff that will make it much less cheap. It means that we need to move into a different sort of way of addressing certain things. Maybe we can't afford to have as many cars as we do, and we need to have a different type of transportation system. Maybe we need to develop cities in a different way, or develop suburbs less, or whatever it is. But at the moment, the number one problem is a political one, and all of these other things necessarily will follow. But I appreciate the call. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, that is all the time we have for our phone call portion of the program. Oh my gosh, already late. Let's do 10 more IMs and then we're out of here. Thick Mulvaney. Hey, whatever happened to the guy who that guy Doug who used to call in?
Michael and I told him not to call anymore because he was supporting the concentration camps at the border.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was a nice guy.
Stop being funny.
Jay Tingle. It's pretty awesome that Smedley Butler's name sounds like smelly butt. Really throws down the gauntlet. Yes, thank you for that. Lori's guy. I've been very interested in this book. Great interview, and now I'll have to go get it. Rory Gatto. Don't forget, Joe Rogan is also a massive transpose.
Phobe, they meant.
Okay. Transphobe. Spreading hate and misinformation about trans people.
That is true.
Jim from PA, you can't claim to be actively exploring a cave if all you do is stand at the entrance and interview people who are not spelunkers and who think that all caves should be sealed up. Rogan's excuse is nonsense. It's always snowy.
It's an interesting analogy.
In Ottawa.
But I do like the use of the word spelunkers.
Let's see. We got two big ones here from It's Always Snowy in Ottawa. Let's just read the latest. Sam, how dare you besmirch the reputation of McGill University and its psychiatric program? That is the esteemed institution where Dr. Cameron conducted various torture experiments on vulnerable people seeking mental health supports. This torture regime was attempting to reset a person's brain like they were a computer. The CIA took notes of that process and used it as a framework to reset left-leaning countries. Shock Doctrine is a book that every single person should read.
Did you say McGill's in Montreal?
Yes.
Yeah. I just like Montreal. That's all I was going to say.
Wait a second.
It's
no,
very
McGill, is it in Montreal? Or is it in Toronto? Montreal? Dr. Splice, the intersection of disability and COVID risk plus hospital and doctor availability leading to increases in non-COVID disease pathology needs to be discussed more as well. All right, 4 more. Future in doubt. Have a hard time believing the supply chain narrative when all the Valentine's Day candy got everywhere in plenty of time. Is it Valentine's Day yet? What are you talking about?
It's like 2 weeks.
Evan from Portland. I'm in HR. FMLA requires exhausting sick leave before unpaid. All right, that's an answer for that person. I don't fully understand it, but Dan from Columbus, right-wingers. The left is also trying to indoctrinate our kids. Also right-wingers. Ben Shapiro, please indoctrinate our kids.
It's not
Champagne
indoctrination
Commie.
if we do it.
Do you think Tom Brady should retire even if he'd be at home watching the games knowing he's still better than most of the quarterbacks out there on the field?
Define most. But I mean, why? What else does he have to prove? I mean,
You want to go out relatively on top. I think you don't want to like wait until you're average.
But don't you think he should hang in there to lock in like a Hall of Fame potential?
You're right. It still is borderline.
All right, the final IM of the day. Mr. Bin Shapiro. Children are our future. Hecklers of Ben Shapiro. Matt, Bradley, Emma, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.